The HR benchmark report is in, and today is the last in our series. This is episode number 8 of an 8-part series for the 2024 HR benchmark report. Here's what we're doing. We did a survey. If you haven't followed along so far, I encourage you to jump back and watch the prior episodes. We surveyed 1,065 small, medium-sized businesses. We broke the employment life cycle out from pre-employment to post-employment. Here are the categories: recruiting, benefits, onboarding, development, compliance, retention, performance, and post-employment. For each of those 8 categories, we asked 5 questions. Do you do this? Do you do that? All the best practices of HR in those areas. We asked one final question at the end: what best describes you last year? Was it a fast growth year? Was it a growth year? Or was it a zero growth year, meaning you were flat or you were down? And so this gave us the ability to correlate revenue growth with HR best practices. And so here we are today. We're unpacking the last one, the topic of post-employment. And what just maybe seemed crazy is you're going to be shocked how much correlation there is to revenue growth to the post-employment best practices. I think so many times, specifically, we're talking about in some of these questions for employees who left on their own accord, not low performers that you let go or pushed out for some other reason. How does this impact your employment brand? What is this an indication of your desire and humility and willingness to get better as an organization? How are you focused on creating a culture and a team that is highly productive and bought into your mission? This one was not intuitive to me. What a strong correlation. I expected post-employment to have a positive correlation to revenue growth because good companies do everything good and maybe bad companies not so much. But I was shocked at how much impact this one had. And I'm really excited to unpack this with you today. Welcome to Mission to Grow, the small business guide to cash, compliance, and the war for talent. I'm your host, Mike Vanoy. Each week, we'll bring you experts in accounting, finance, human resources, benefits, employment law, and more. You'll learn ways to access capital through creative financing and tax strategies, tactical information you need to stay compliant with ever-changing employment laws, and people strategies you need to win the war for talent. Mission to Grow is sponsored by Assure. Assure helps more than 100,000 businesses get access to capital, stay compliant, and develop the talent they need to grow. Enjoy the show. All right, here we are, the grand finale. This is category number 8 of 8 for this series, where we are walking through the HR benchmark report. Topic number 1 was pre-employment through post-employment. So recruiting, benefits, onboarding, development, compliance, retention, performance. And this week we're covering post-employment. Here's maybe the biggest surprise of all. So post-employment HR best practices, no surprise. It's not the number 1, number 2, number 3 most impactful categories on as it correlates to revenue growth. But shockingly, and I'm looking at the data right here, it's number 5 out of 8. It's not last. It's not even at the bottom. It's middle of the pack. So I think it's quite counterintuitive. How the heck could your post-employment best practices, by the way, we're going to get into them, and they're rather compliance heavy. What the hell does that have to do with revenue growth? Really excited to actually tackle this topic that I think isn't self-evident for folks. Welcome to the show. By now, you all know Mary Simmons, our VP of HR Compliance. Unpack the topic. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. And I'm excited to talk about this topic as well. Sad that we're at the end of the report because, I find it very interesting and I think helpful to our listeners. And I'm surprised also. I think that oftentimes employers might think, oh, they're at the end of employment, don't let the door hit you. And they're rushing people out the door. Right. But you, of all people, understand that every individual we come into contact with, and we talk about it at hire, right? Even if we don't hire that person, we want them to have a good experience with our organization. We don't want them going on sites and saying bad things about the organization. But when they leave, maybe it's not maybe they're going on to, a bigger position that we don't have. We still want that, person to be an ambassador of our company and have goodwill. And I think that always helps. I mean, there's a lot of times where I worked for an organization, somebody left, we left on good terms, and they refer business back to me. They'll go, I might have went to sort of a competitor, but you do this better, Mary. Can you help this client?
Yeah. Yeah. No question. To me, I think there's a couple big takeaways here. I'm a big believer in employment brand. I've worked places where I had a first interview that I thought we just hit it off so beautifully. And I'm like, oh, this is a rock star. Can't wait to, you know me pretty well. I can get a little chummy and I like having lots of conversations and I really want to know someone pretty deeply before I hire them. And I can't wait to get to the second interview and they ghost me. And I'm very positive because, oh, they started doing their homework. It's like, woo, like Mike, but I don't want to work for that company. Right. And I've been at places like that in the past. And so employment brand really, really, really matters. I've also been at places where the reputation is stellar and candidates are stacked at the door, right? They want to join. They want to get credentialed by that type of a firm. Either it's the brand cachet or it's the reputation in the market of making money or whatever it is. And so employment brand really, really, really matters. I think that's takeaway number one. Would you agree?
I love that. Yes.
Yeah.
You know, I do.
Yeah. I think there's number two in so the math guy in me feels compelled to almost confess. We talk about this once in a while. Whenever you look at a study, and this is a big one, right? 1,065 respondents, big sample size. You read the Wall Street Journal, you might be looking at a survey says, and there's 150 respondents, right? So this is statistically significant, big sample size, big survey. So you can take it to the bank. But there's a difference between correlation and causation. So I don't think either one of us would contend that having a great post-employment HR practices is going to cause you to grow in revenue. But certainly the correlation is there. And there has to be a component that is employment brand related that just is intuitive. But I think maybe less intuitive. I talked about it, I think, in episode number 1 of this series. Great companies do everything right. And bad companies do lots of things wrong. And I think there's something to be said that if you have good post-employment practices, you probably just central to your philosophy is treating people well, treating them with respect in this desire to continuously get better. And hard to allocate how much of the impact comes from that. But I got to believe maybe that's the biggest impact. It's not even the employment brand. What I'm curious your opinion on
that. I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I think the fast growing companies do want to learn from their mistakes. We do exit interviews all the time for our clients, but I do have some clients that'll say, no, it's okay. I don't care. They're leaving. I don't care why they're leaving. And we try to point them to the reasons why you do want to know. Because number one, retention is very expensive. So you want to do an exit interview so you know why they're leaving. That exit interview might also tell you some compliance gaps. You might have a manager speaking inappropriately and they don't want to talk about it until after they resign because they're scared, nervous, etc. So I think the fast growth firms, as you said, they want to know and learn from their mistakes and just get better and better. And you can't do that if you're not informed. You have to be informed. You have to have data and you have to have information to get better.
Yeah. All right. Let's unpack the questions themselves. Because I think that'd be really insightful. So I'm just going to rattle off all 5, then we'll go back to the top. So number 1, do you provide exiting employees with a termination letter? Spoiler alert, that one thing has the highest correlation in this category. It's one of the highest correlating to revenue growth questions in the entire survey of all 40 questions. Kind of shocking.
Right.
So do you provide exiting employees with a termination letter? Number 2, do you consistently follow written policy for final paycheck, PTO balance, retirement plans, etc.? Do you conduct exit interviews with voluntary terminations? So people who are quitting on their own, do you do exit interviews with them? Not just those who you've pushed out the door. Are you certain you're compliant with timing and any deductions from their final paycheck? Are you certain you're compliant with COBRA requirements? So I'm going to hone in the zero growth in fast growth for those who've been watching the series. So we bucketed all the responses into 3 categories. So zero growth means either they're flat or down year over year. Fast growth means just what they said. They're a fast growing company. So across all population, 67% of zero growth firms said yes to these 5 questions. 86% of the fast growth firms did. If I look at my smaller employers and I carve out the 25 and under employees, the fast growth ceiling doesn't change. It went from 86 to 84. So 84% of all fast growth companies under 25 employees said yes to this. But the floor dropped a bunch with the zero growth. From 67 went down to 58%. So about half the time they said yes to 84% they said yes. It's a 26% spread. 26 percentage point difference from fast growth to zero growth on post-employment. All right, crazy. Let's talk about the first one. Do you provide exiting employees with a termination letter? It's a 40% spread, right? The zero growth firm said yes, 42%. Fast growth, 82%. This is for the under 25 employees. There's nothing about being a small company that prevents you from, you're maybe a little taxed on resources and time.
Yeah.
But this is not a compliance issue. It's not like the law requires it above and below certain employee, like Cobra. We'll talk about that.
Well, they do. They do. Some states do.
Okay.
Many states.
And I had that wrong. But you want to give some examples? I don't know if you can list all
California,
of them.
New York, Washington, Massachusetts, Colorado will mandate that termination letter. And some will mandate, so there's going to be a compliance piece to this. A big compliance piece, right? So even if you're in a state that doesn't mandate a termination letter, so I'm just going to use New York because I'm in New York. We all know that by now. And I was talking to a relatively small employer yesterday and again this morning because he's like, what? I want to terminate this person, Mary. You're telling me I have to give them a termination letter. Been in business for years, didn't realize this. So I helped him craft that termination letter. But don't forget, besides it being mandated by New York State, let's say they were in Minnesota where it's not mandated, you should be telling the employee who's exiting, whether they terminate or not, when do they get their last pay, if they have benefits, what's happening with their benefits, their medical, their 401k, right? And, the compliance piece comes in where I'll read, maybe an employer does have a termination letter. Number one, if your employer at will state, don't go into great details on that letter. And by all means, don't soften it. And if they stole from you or you suspect that they stole from you, don't put on that termination letter like one of my clients and say they were laid off. They will get unemployment. You may not want to give unemployment to somebody that you're pretty sure stole from the organization. They left for cause, and you want to have some documentation. So that termination letter, there's a lot of reasons. Are you paying out their PTO or not? That is very important. There's a lot of laws and a lot of states that may not mandate that termination letter, but you have to tell them whether you're paying out PTO and how much you're paying out. And here's where I'm going to say, please be conservative. Don't say, I'm saving that $200. And I know, that it's hard to operate a business, but don't say to yourself, I'm going to save the $200 and not pay the PTO. It's not worth a lawsuit or the Department of Labor knocking on your door and saying they put in a claim, pay it.
Yeah.
It opens you up.
And while I completely forgot that some states mandate it, so thank you.
That's okay. It's not what you do.
I suspect that the sample size is big enough here that's accounted for in, we got zero growth and fast growth in mandated states and non-mandated states.
Agreed.
Why, and given that, why do you think there's it's a 40% spread? It's 42% of zero growth firms said yes. 82% of fast growth firms said yes, that they do the termination letter. How on earth could a termination letter correlate to revenue growth?
Well, I think doing things right is always going to relate to revenue growth. And I think that termination letter speaks to the employment brand that you spoke about, having that employee be an ambassador of the organization, right? Look, we always talk about the first impression, and we talked about that in our first section. The last impression that an employee has of your organization is equally as important because it's their last impression of the organization. So have them go out and have that professional experience and understand everything. The other thing is, if you think that this takes too much time, and so my smaller employers might say, I don't have time, I don't have time. Well, obviously, I help my clients do it, so they don't need to spend their time doing it. But if it's not a client, it will take less money to put all of this information in one letter, which should take you 10 minutes, than having that ex-employee call back and go, when's my last pay?
Wow.
When's, and asking all those questions. And by the way, compliance-wise, can't hold that last paycheck. There are very small exceptions. If I had a company car, not holding that last paycheck.
Yeah,
Very small.
we have some podcast shows on that topic. Encourage
Yeah.
folks to
Yep.
look that one up out of the archives. I have this vision in my head. That sounds stupid. It's like, even if I'm terminated, even if I'm terminated and that's something that I know that I did wrong, or maybe I was slacking or whatever, a lot of employees have some self-awareness about this. And I'm just thinking back when I was a kid, when I, my dad was the disciplinarian of the house. And when he said, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you, he really meant it. Like, it hurt him to have to discipline me. Right.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't true, because it hurt my butt way worse than it hurt his. But there's that empathy. It's like, I know that he's a tough disciplinarian and he's a tough dude. But I also know that it comes from a place of love and consistency and respect and expectations. Right. And I suspect that creeps in here, that like you said, this is perhaps your last chance to make an impression on this place. Like, you know what? I didn't want to leave. I think I shouldn't have been fired for that. That's kind of crazy, but I appreciate that they're straight up with me and everything's above board. At least I understand everything. Right. And they might not articulate it that way, but I do believe it.
They internalize it, I think. And believe it or not, there is lawsuits out there for the termination where you're like, here's your box, fill it up, get out. There is lawsuits for, negligent terminations, et cetera. And you said it, you have to be consistent as well. So, if your employer brand includes treating people with respect, they should be treated with respect on the way out as well as the way in. And I understand, I worked in banking for years, so we did have theft, unfortunately. It's a little tempting when you're dealing with money all day long. Even those individuals should be treated with respect.
Yeah, right. Totally agree. All right. It really dovetails to this next one. It probably carves out the difference between mandated states and non-mandated states. The next question: do you consistently follow a written policy for final paycheck, PTO, balance, retirement plans, etc.? 68% of zero growth said yes. 96% of fast growth. So virtually all. 96 is really, really close to the highest individual's score across the entire survey. So it seems like, again, this feels to me like well-run companies that are growing fast, they probably just do everything right, including dotting every I, crossing every T, even for exiting employees.
Yes, I agree. And there is a big compliance piece here. And I think one of the other drivers is they want you off the benefits, right? So compliance-wise, you need to be off the benefits, but the organizations want to stop paying for those benefits. So they're going to be very explicit and make sure that they remember. Well, I guess they wouldn't have to remember to tell you about it, and they could just take you off, but it really should be done in this way. And it sounds like most are doing it on the fast growth, the slow growth. Again, hopefully they're listening to us and, put this into their process for terminations.
Yeah. Yeah. We covered a lot of that final paycheck kind of stuff in the first one with the termination letter. Anything you'd want to say on let's almost conjoin those two as one question. Anything you would add before we move on to the next one?
I just want to reiterate, I do have a lot of employers who will be like, well, I don't have to do this. And I'll say, we have to go back to your handbook. If your handbook says, and that's why we do customized handbooks, right? Many states, you don't have to pay out the PTO. California, you do. If I gave Mike 10 days off and he didn't take any of it, when he leaves, that is considered wages and I need to pay it out. But for those states where it's not mandated, I would think what are you doing, and do it consistently. But you need to have that as a policy in your handbook. That goes back to expectations, right? And it keeps your managers and your organization consistent, right? One of the employers I'm working with right now said to me, I'm just all over the place, Mary. I can't even remember what I give for PTO. That's why I need a handbook. And I said, yeah, beyond the multiple compliance things that are going to go in there, that handbook saves you time, because you've got one point of reference and it helps you and your managers be consistent.
Yeah. I mean, you and I could talk. I mean, we have talked handbooks ad nauseum, but we could talk another couple 100 hours on this topic. I was talking to an employer just this week. They thought they had a well understood PTO policy, but all of a sudden all it took was one employee shifting locations and a shift change in the day they would have been scheduled to work previously is now just naturally, because of the way that location works, nobody worked those hours. And so now is that time paid time off time? Is it not? And so, but there wasn't a handbook that had it written down, right? So there's this employer's end up erring on the side of the employee, and probably costing them money unnecessarily. And it just created a distraction that wasn't necessary. Right.
Right.
Okay. Here's a big meaty one. Do you conduct exit interviews with voluntary terminations? So the spread is, I'll say, in the middle of the road for this category. It's a 14% spread with all firms. Smaller ones, it's a 27% spread. So it's still meaningful. Small firms, 53% of the zero growth said yes. 80% of fast growth said yes. So a little over half of even the zero growth firms say they do it. I don't think I want to challenge them whether they actually are or not. I think it's the qualitative versus quantitative nature. It's like maybe they're, I suspect a lot of people on both sides, fast and zero growth, are, it's a 1 minute conversation at the door as they say goodbye, probably more than it is an actual structured interview. We don't capture that in the survey. What's your sense? What's the underlying root cause of why this correlates to revenue growth? The fact that you have an exit interview with an employee who left on their own decision, not you pushing them out.
Right. So I know why I terminated somebody, but I don't really know why somebody else is leaving. They may say, I found another job, but is that really the reason? Or was it their manager? Or was it the pay? So what we recommend, and of course we do it for employers to take, this, time-consuming task off their plate. What we recommend is that you send we do it through a survey tool so that we can collate the data. Big on data, right? I can't guess why people are leaving. I need the data. And then we talk to the employee. And because we're outsourced, we do get information that they might be reticent. Even if they're leaving, they may feel bad saying, I didn't like my manager, Joe. He was rude to me. The workload is ridiculous. Whatever it is, we like to dig into some of the reasons and give some more detailed information to the employer and then come up with a plan. Here's the data. 20% are leaving for salary. I've said this before. Now we need to do a salary benchmark. If we can't afford to pay more, what are we going to do to compete with the other organizations that are paying more? Can I give better benefits, et cetera? And then you need to, work on how to retain staff. So you're going to grow if you have less retention. We said that in the retention section. But if you don't know why people are leaving, how can you possibly know how to stem the tide of people leaving? Right. You have to know the real reason, Mike.
That's right. That's right. This is one of those things. I agree with you. I'll make the case this is something that ideally is outsourced, because exiting employees, they might be quitting because of the person who's interviewing them in the exit interview, right? And what's the likelihood of them coming clean on that?
Or their friend, right?
Yeah, right. So if you can swing it, ideally, would love you to use Assure and use Mary's team, or use some other third party, or a friend, or somebody outside the firm would be ideal. I think the aggregate, because if you're a small employer, you're 25 employees, you got a 20% turnover, so you're hiring 4 to 5 people a year. It's not that many. Whether you conduct the exit interview or somebody else does, you know who they are. You're gonna have predisposed bias. Oh, they were naggy. They were needy. Oh, they were awesome. I was glad to keep them as long as I could. Yeah, you already have your predisposition. This becomes really valuable when you look at the reasons in aggregate, right? So you can see correlation to pay, correlation to benefits, hours, flexibility, work location, work environment, good boss, bad boss. It's the aggregation of this information that I think is really, really important.
Agreed. Don't guess why people are leaving. Find out the real reason. And then act on it.
And take them at face value. This isn't an inquisition. If they say, I'm underpaid, and you have some salary benchmarking data to prove that they're wrong, well, they still left thinking that's the reason. And if you have enough people thinking that's the reason, maybe you are paying enough, but maybe you need to include a total compensation statement as part of your employment practice, so people can understand the value, because they're not getting it, right? There's still, even when the person might be quote unquote wrong, there's still things you can do to act on it.
Great suggestion.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I think maybe the other topic on this one, I just think it requires a level of humility. If you're so someone left on their own, it's so easy to I only want people here who want to be here, and screw them. Yeah. If they don't want they don't like it here, screw them.
I've heard that from employers. Yeah, I have to talk them off the ledge.
And I'll say, those words may have crossed my lips a few times. I understand the feeling. It is true. You really do only want people who are going to be engaged and actually want to be here. I get that. But it also requires some humility to think, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't have all the answers. Maybe I'm really good, but I think I could probably get better. And even if I can't get better, I need to validate the reasons what I think my strengths and weaknesses are. I just think, as much as anything, this requires humility and a willingness to ask, right?
I do. And the exit interview isn't to try to talk somebody into staying, but there has been examples where they said, I'm leaving because of XYZ, and they're a stellar employee and you can make a change. They just didn't ask because they're a stellar employee and they're like, I don't want to be a pain in the neck. There also has been examples where we had an exit interview with somebody, and maybe they said it was pay, and then we get, the organization expands and we can bring them back as a manager and pay them more. And we did bring them back. So to say somebody leaves, I never want, you're dead to me. And there's a lot of organizations like that, and big organizations. I think it is so short-sighted because you can't be everything to everybody, but you might change and be able to bring this person that has institutional knowledge, the skills you want. They know they work well in the organization. You just didn't have that managerial position or whatever position it is that they left for. So to me, that's another reason why an exit interview is important. There may be a way to bring that person back or to keep the person. Not that that's your goal, but it is an offset and I think an added benefit to why you would do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Agree completely. I'm going to move to our next two questions. One is quite specific, but both are compliance related.
Yeah.
The first one is, are you certain you're compliant with timing and any deductions from the final paycheck? This had the lowest correlation to revenue growth out of the group. It was 9% spread, both small and large companies, larger companies. 82%, coincidentally, 82% of zero growth said yes. 91% of fast growth said yes. Not much of a spread. When you and I have looked at this kind of data before, I think we've seen a pattern where even the good companies, they don't know what they don't know, and they're not nearly as compliant as they probably think they are. What do you think's going on here?
Yeah, I took the words right out of my mouth. I think that is correct. And like I said to you, you're not going to answer that question and say, no, I'm not paying them correctly, right? Because if you knew you weren't paying them correctly, you would correct it. So I think they don't know what they don't know. And there's so many little nuances. And we talked about this already today, but I'll just reiterate, there's very compliance-driven reasons. There's the Fair Labor Standards Act. There's the Department of Labor for each state. And then there could be a municipal difference. Certainly in a big state like California or New York, there may be a municipal difference, right? It could be that they have an additional leave law that another area didn't, and that leave has to be paid out. And, are you referencing your handbook? The policies that you created have to be consistent about how you're paying individuals when they leave. So there's a lot of checks and balances that have to be looked at. So I hope everybody's doing it correctly. I hope for the employee as well as the employer. I'm just a little skeptical.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you handle it when you walk into a client? Because, I mean, if you're intentionally breaking the law, okay, you're evil, and I'm assuming you're one half of 1% of the people in the survey. Most entrepreneurs and business owners, they're just grinding. They're just doing their best. They're not breaking laws on purpose. They're not trying to take advantage of people. But I mean, you and I we've done podcasts on this topic, like what can you withhold from a final check, right? They haven't returned the computer. Well, of course, I'm not going to give them their final check until they return that stuff. Well, breaking the law. Right. So I think that so much of this is out of ignorance. How do you first engage a client and advise them in this area?
So if it's this area specifically and the pay, obviously we do a Fair Labor Standards Act audit. So that audit is going to go over how you pay them, classify them, and everything in between. And I know you've had conversations with Brian Schenker and myself on this topic. But it's also going to talk about when they leave, how you must pay them as per FLSA, and then that particular state. So an FLSA audit would also include the specific state and how to pay them. And that termination pay is definitely going to be something that we hone in on, because we do see a lot of audits there by the DOL of different states. And those audits, wage and hour claims outtrend anti-harassment 2-to-1. Okay. And they are very costly, because don't forget, if you're paying one person wrong, you're most likely paying many people wrong. And if an attorney finds that, they're going to look for a class action. And now you get into real money.
Class action is expensive even if you win, the cost to defend.
You just have to defend it. Yeah.
And the other thing is, and tell me if I have this right. I think so. Like if it was a harassment claim, sexual harassment lawsuit. There might be an investigation. There could be an EEOC investigation into your business, but it's at least more likely that's going to be adjudicated on that one instance in that case. But if this is wage and hour, you're not properly paying out overtime or PTO balances or whatever the law says. If the DOL, Fed or state gets involved, they're not going to just stop at that one thing that was reported to them, either through a lawsuit or a whistleblower or something. They're going to dig in. They're going to do an audit of your books, and they're going to go back years, right?
Correct.
And so you're not only going to have to make the wrongs right, you're going to be paying fines for years worth of this practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very expensive.
Yeah. All right. Last question here. Now this doesn't apply to everybody. We've done, I think maybe a few weeks back, our mutual friend, Heather, manager in our benefits business, talked in detail about Cobra. I encourage you to check that show out if you're interested. Are you certain you're compliant with Cobra requirements? 14% spread. So 71% of zero growth firms said yes. 85% of fast growth firms said yes. So seems like most people are relatively confident here. But again, the faster growing companies are, even if they're not right, they're at minimum, they're more confident. Can you just maybe 60 seconds unpack what Cobra is, which companies need to comply, et cetera? We did a whole hour on this, Heather and I. So you don't have to go deep, but just recap it, and then we'll talk why it might correlate to revenue growth.
Yeah, sure. Of course. So Cobra is for employers with 20 employees or more that offer medical benefits. And that Cobra is coverage that your employees get after they leave your employee, whether they are terminated on their own or you terminate them. There are a few examples, and I'm not going to go into the details here, where you wouldn't have to give Cobra, gross misconduct being one of them. I think the miss here is, first of all, you have to pay that Cobra by law, and you need to give that notification. So obviously at termination, we should be giving that information and giving it correctly. And there's quite a few nuances to giving that information. But in addition, there are many states that have mini Cobra. Those mini Cobra laws are for employers with less than 20 employees. Those states mandate Cobra if you have medical insurance that you're offering an employee to employers with less than 20 employees. And they're kind of all over the place. We wouldn't be able to explain all of them. But that is the big miss. I was just talking to an employer the other day about a termination letter. Do you give medical? And he's like, yeah, but I'm under 20 employees. And I go, you still have to give mini Cobra because you're a New York employer. And he went, what? I have never done that. I was like, So again, compliance will always take precedent, right? We try to protect organizations, but I would say that I have a lot of organizations who may be in a state where there isn't a lot of compliance that they have to adhere to. But there's always going to be federal laws that they do have to. FLSA and COBRA are federal laws. And they do have a number that triggers them, but employers need to be aware, right? They might grow to 20 employees. So you need to be aware of those laws.
Yeah. That wraps not only this segment of post-employment, it wraps the entire series on the HR Benchmark Report. Mary, maybe take a minute. You can recap post-employment if you want, but I think we probably did a good job covering it. I feel like we did. Maybe you just step back to the entire survey. This whole notion that HR best practices could correlate to revenue growth. I choose the word correlate, not cause. I think we've talked about that enough. We understand the causation versus correlation. But the sample size is so big. It's just undeniable that the correlation exists between revenue growth and HR best practices. If you had to just kind of rattle off the top of your head, maybe not the questions, But the big themes, why do you think there's such a strong correlation?
Well, I think for too long, and HR is really the only job I've ever had. I've been at very big organizations and done consulting for many years. So I work with lots of small organizations now on the consulting side. And for too long, organizations see HR as a cost center. It is not anymore. And HR professionals always talk about, we want a seat at the table. We've earned that seat at the table. And I think this HR benchmark definitely proves that. And the only reason we want a seat at the table is because we want to help our organizations grow. We want to be part of the growth and the ROI. And you can't get anywhere without your employees. There's very few organizations who can't have engaged employees and be successful.
Yeah.
To have engaged, successful, productive employees, your HR function has to be, number one, compliant, right? So when we're compliant, we're giving our employees the benefits that they deserve and that they get. And a lot of times those benefits don't cost the employer anything, right? They could be federal or state provided and or a very small cost to the employer, right? And so those engaged, productive employees are going to drive our ROI and our growth of our organization. HR is a pivotal piece to, growth of an organization. And the mission to grow is really integral to a strong HR function.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, I would agree with everything you just said. I'm 28 years in this industry. And I came up on the sales and marketing side. In the mid-90s, I was a sales rep selling to small and mid-sized businesses, human capital management solutions like payroll, time and attendance, etc. And then as I kind of my career advanced and I was in the sales leadership side, my day-to-day was very focused on productivity, right? High producing sales teams. And certainly there's tools and there's training and there's talent and there's compensation and there's all these factors. But without question, I had my greatest success when I had great HR partners in the organization that helped me develop the most talented teams. I think you and I talked about this on our episode number 8. We're talking about performance. You could be a great coach, but if you have no talent on your team, you're going to lose to another team that might not even be coached as well that has great talent. You got to have both. You got to have talent and you got to be a great coach. In having HR there, not just for the compliance stuff, right? It's not, you can almost read between the lines and these, I'll say the majority of these zero growth firms who are answering no to a lot of these best practices. It just seems clear that there's this administrative compliance oriented bias to HR that I'm checking boxes, I'm following laws, I'm doing the things I'm supposed to do, but just things like the humility required to do exit interviews, the humility required to put together an employee handbook with great job descriptions and then have an onboarding process that I really explain all this stuff to have to create the culture that I'm wanting.
Yeah.
It's all about the people, and it's all about getting the talent, developing that talent and retaining that talent. And that's HR, right?
Correct.
And so in some ways it's not self-evident to maybe the spreadsheet oriented, financially driven decision maker and business leader.
Right.
Like, man, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you need people, and that's going to require great HR. Perfect. Mary, this was a fun series. Thank you so much for doing it with me.
Thank you. It was great. Enjoyed it.
Yeah. And thanks to everybody else. Man, really mean it. I think this series hit it home that we're just thrilled to be with you on your mission to grow. That's it for this episode of Mission to Grow. Thanks for joining us today. For show notes and more episodes, visit us at missiontogrow.com. If you found this content valuable, I invite you to share it with a friend and subscribe to the show. If you really want to help, I'd love it if you left a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Mission to Grow is sponsored by Assure. Assure helps more than 100,000 businesses get access to capital, stay compliant, and develop the talent they need to grow. To learn more about how Assure can help your business grow, visit assuresoftware.com. Until next time.